What I loved about him was he made whoever it was he was talking with feel that they were the most important thing right at that moment. And he made everybody he talked with feel important.
Bob was pretty much a complete individual. And from that, I mean, he was not just a strong businessman, but he understood the social relationship between his commitment to this community as a banker, as a businessman, and the part he played in the well-being of this environment here.
The story of the success of M&T Bank is almost unrivaled, I would say, in the industry, period, end of discussion. And his legacy of the bank, he will simply go down as one of the most significant figures in the history of Buffalo, period.
Bob Wilmers was a Renaissance man personified, a great banker, a great civic leader, and above all, a great human being.
I'll tell you this, he made it his business to understand his customers and to get to know his customers. You felt like you were important to Bob Wilmers when you were a customer.
He was real friendly, approachable, and nicest person you ever want to meet.
He had a way of getting people charged up and interested and excited, and if you were doing something that was his idea, you knew that you had to do it really, really well.
I think Buffalo was Mr. Wilmers' adopted city. I think he really loved it.
We lost him at a time where Buffalo's optimism is at a particularly high point, but it wasn't coincidental. We got there because of his vision, because of his commitment, and because of his corporate generosity and personal generosity.
I honestly think Bob, if it weren't for Bob Wilmers, I don't know where Buffalo would be today.
He literally said it would be nice if Buffalo could recapture some of its former strength and glory, and if I could be a part of that, it would be nice. Some nice. He's been nice in the way that Winston Churchill was nice.
I mean, when Bob came here, it was 80-something, and it was not a pretty place to be. And most of us, I guess, don't realize that until you now see what we have and what we had then, and you say, wow, what a difference.
There is not an existing business in Buffalo that doesn't have the stamp of M&T Bank on it.
I got to know Bob as head of M&T Bank because I so admired how hard he worked for Buffalo and upstate New York, how much he cared about the region. His bank was an outstanding bank. He helped so many businesses grow and thrive and prosper in the upstate area. And he ran the company in a kind and caring way.
We were always a community bank, and he would never let me forget that, Brent. We are a community bank. We're not a money-centered bank. We never will be. We will always be a community bank.
The Albright Knox Art Gallery, the Buffalo Science Museum, the Buffalo History Museum, the Shays Buffalo, the Buffalo Zoo, the Darwin Martin House.
Name a cultural organization of consequence that Bob, Elizabeth, the bank, hasn't had a profound impact on.
Bob Wilmers saw, as go the schools in the city of Buffalo, so go the neighborhoods, so go the economic development, so goes the turnaround for the city.
And this is why he was so involved in Westminster and in Buffalo Promise Neighborhood. After Westminster, we went bigger with Buffalo Promise Neighborhood so that we could impact thousands more, and that's what we did.
Without Westminster's education and the Promise Scholar program, I don't think I'd be here. I would not have as many accomplishments if it weren't for Mr. Wilmers.
We would always say that he didn't have to do these things, but he did it because it was the right thing to do.
He was never satisfied. He always felt he could do better.
Bob was never done.
Bob never spiked the ball. He never did a victory dance. He never high-fived. He was on to the next task, despite the great success that he had helped this community forge.
I think he always wanted to continue to strive to be the best, to work with his customers, work with the community going forward. And I don't think he would ever sit down on his laurels and say, I'm done.
I think he always felt that there was more to do. And he never let me rest on my laurels and think that this is it, because he would always ask me what's next.
I said, Bob, I need a female executive who can, serve on the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. And he said, what about you? Yeah, I think you'd be great. You ought to do this. And I was like, that isn't why I called you. And, but by the end of the conversation, of course, you know, I was applying to be a member of the authority and still am.
I was told about the number two pencils that he had to use. And there was a big box of them. And I just prayed that I would never run out before the two of us retired. He would use them, and then at the end of the night, there'd be 5 or 6 in the outbox because he wanted a very sharp pencil. His number 2 pencil had to be as sharp as could possibly be, so I was constantly sharpening pencils for him.
There would be meetings at the bank, the famous luncheons with Bob Wilmers, where he got to eat and you didn't.
You know, every time we had customers into lunch, I would warn them and I would say, you know, you might leave this lunch hungry because Bob is going to ask you so many questions.
And we all knew we were on deck when the questions started.
I would occasionally get the question like, Marie, do you remember like 15, 17 years ago, there was a report made to the board of directors, I think it was maybe in May, and it had to do with such and such. Could you get me a copy of that report? And sure enough, it would be there.
Bob with a dry sense of humor and very, very funny.
Somebody would expect him to do something, and he would say, that's above my pay grade. And I would think, it's not above, you're the only one that's not above your pay grade, you know?
We first met on a tennis court, actually. I expected Bob to be chauffeured to the court in a suitable car and then presented his tennis racket, maybe on a platter or something. Instead, he showed up in a car that resembled something my mother drove in the 1960s. I think it was a AMC Rambler, well before there was galvanized metal. And it was clear Bob didn't believe in aftermarket rust proofing.
I like the fact that he rode a bike that looked like he bought it from Thomas Edison. He was a lesson to all us shanty Irishmen who seek the limelight that that's not the way to go. He's a friend that I will really miss and that I learned a lot from.
I don't think we'll say goodbye to Bob. I think we're going to see him around forever.
Thanks for being here. You did unbelievably for this community. You know, if you can love a guy, I loved him.
He had a great brain, he had a great heart, he had a great soul. To Elizabeth and his family, Bob, we will sure miss you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmers, for everything.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob, for being my mentor, being my ultimate boss, and most of all, my dear friend.
And most of all for this community, my grandchildren, my children, my grandchildren, thank you. Where today you have left a community in a very different place than when you found it.
Jerry Kozlowski, his assistant, would call and say, Mr. Wilmers is on the line for you. And I'd say, hello, Mr. Wilmers, how are you? And he would say, all the better for having spoken to you today.